I know you can be overwhelmed and you can be underwhelmed, but can you ever just be whelmed? I think you can in Europe.
Hey, welcome back to the Whelmed podcast brought to you by the 3Bs in a pod. Before we keep going with the podcast, we'd like to acknowledge that this land that we meet on today is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. This special episode is an interview with Zein, who is a PhD student in my supervisor's lab, and he's going to share some information about his experience undertaking a PhD and how he went through it and what he was studying, and hopefully this is helpful to anyone who is thinking of doing further study after their undergrad degree, especially if you're thinking of doing a PhD. Zein is also a very creative person, and he actually has a poetry book. He writes poetry, and if you want to check it out, it's called Distant. It's available on Amazon, and it's about a long-distance relationship, and whether or not you've ever been in a long-distance relationship or had to keep a connection with someone over long distance, I would highly recommend it. I love reading his poems, and he's pretty great. And he's also a minor internet celebrity, if you didn't know. I'm not going to share his socials here, but you can probably find him on TikTok, where he shares his poetry there as well. But stay tuned, and you'll get to hear from Zein pretty soon.
Hi, my name is Zein, and you're listening to the Whelmed podcast.
So today I've brought in a very special guest who is actually a PhD student in my supervisor's lab. And he's going to talk to us about postgrad study and a couple of other things. We'll see how this conversation goes. Hello, Zein. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed,
but
okay.
alive and thriving.
Yep. And that's because you're writing your thesis at the moment?
Yep. I finish up next month. And I should be submitting a draft of the entire thesis end of next week.
Mm-hmm.
Very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so fun. But no, it'll be exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to start off, I guess, what made you decide you wanted to go and pursue a PhD?
Good question. I guess I've always enjoyed teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So research, I don't mind. I wouldn't say it's my calling in life, but I understood that if I wanted to lecture full time, then having a PhD would allow me to do that rather than just keep having a casual contracts, which I currently have. So for me, it was kind of, do I just kind of bite the bullet and do another 3.5 years of research to get to where I want to go? And I guess I did.
Yeah.
And here I am.
And just for everyone listening, what's a basic overview of what you're studying?
Sure. So I look at the role and function of water channels in the brain, more specifically in Alzheimer's disease-related stress and aging and dementia.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And for people listening, I actually first got to know Zein through one of my tutorials. I think it was a practical, and you were one of the tutors, like going through.
Was it for MSK?
Not for MSK. It was for neuroanatomy, I think.
Oh yeah, neuroanatomy.
Yeah,
That would
and
make sense.
yeah, and like we had all these little stations, and
Yeah.
you were at one of the stations. I was like, he's pretty cool. He knows what he's talking about.
Did it? Is that
Yeah,
what it said?
yeah,
Well, you know what they say, fake it till you make it. So,
yeah.
Whenabouts were you? That was like 2 years ago now,
2
right?
years ago, yeah.
No, okay, I knew my stuff back then.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing anatomy, like practice and stuff for like 4 years now. When I started, I was just like, kind of go
Yeah.
fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
That's honestly a strong advice. You have to fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And then eventually you will know it. But anyways.
You're gonna have to know it all at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so before you started doing your PhD, were you studying like honours or a different degree?
I did undergrad in health science. Back then it was just health science. And then I took a year off. It wasn't I didn't purposely take a year off. It's just a project that I wanted to get into back then, which I'm lucky I didn't end up getting into because everything happens for a reason. I initially wanted to do stroke research.
Oh, cool.
And then I didn't end up getting into that project just because I was interstate when I had to go in to see some surgeries and a few other things. And so I ended up taking a year off. And then I just worked full time, traveled a bit, or just went to see family in Lebanon. And then I came back and did my honors with Andrea, but she was my co-supervisor at the time. So I did microbiology. So I did infectious disease for like water channels in infectious bacteria.
Oh, that's cool.
And then it was very different.
Yeah.
And then I came back to neurophysiology aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely cool. And do you think if going through what you've gone through, would you recommend to people like going straight into a PhD, or would you say take some time off before you actually start committing to that
You want my
workload?
full transparent opinion?
Sure, go for it.
I don't think PhD is for everyone, which I think people know that, but they don't really know that at the same time. I think you really have to know what you want before you get into a PhD. Like I did undergrad for the sake of doing undergrad because I didn't know where I want to go in life. And then I just like tumbled across and kept going with the flow, as they say. And then I did honors because I still didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I liked teaching, but I spent the first 6 months to a year of my PhD really struggling with the decision of taking my PhD. I think it's because I was trying to weigh up whether me stomaching it, as they say, for 3.5 years was worth the outcome for me. And it was honestly, in all transparency, it was really hard on my like mental health, just because it was very overwhelming to begin with. It was actually the most overwhelming in the first 6 months to a year. But I think everyone's in their own journey. Recommendations, I think if you know that you want to do research, it's good in Australia, you can do honors and then see how you feel. If you see that research is something you're excited about, then definitely do a PhD. I feel like in that situation, prolonging it would reduce the likelihood of you doing it because then you just get into life and, you would actually earn money.
Yeah.
And I think that's a factor to consider. Once you actually get out into life, it's hard for you to come back to tertiary education once you've kind of built something for yourself in terms of financially. But on the opposite end, there's never really too old. Angela I did undergrad with Angela and she didn't take any breaks and she's a grandma and she just finished a PhD and
which is really
accomplished
exciting.
amazing things and got dean's accommodation. So like really there is no limit for it. It really comes down to what do you want out of it. And if you're unsure, maybe taking at least 6 months to consider would be wise.
Hey, you're listening to the Whelmed podcast. Hope you're feeling whelmed.
And have you been working part-time while you've been doing your PhD?
Yeah, I would consider myself a workaholic. Not that I choose to be, I just became that way with circumstances. No, I do work. So technically speaking, if you consider a PhD a job, which I guess it is, 7 days a week. So I work Saturday, Sunday as a barista. And that's been consistent actually since I started. So really, it's odd. It's like, it is work, but it's also very different to research. So it's kind of relaxing in a weird sense. It's taxing on your body, but kind of just gets your mind off of what you go through from Monday to Friday.
Yeah, so in a way that would sort of balance what you're doing with
and
research.
Earn money.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Look, my body does tire out at points, but I tend to kind of have a pretty free, I always keep my nights free. So really, it's not like I'm jam-packed. I just have a really busy day, but not really a busy night.
So would you say that you like hustle, but you've also got a work-life balance?
Yeah, I definitely have a work-life balance. No, I'm very strenuous on maintaining a work-life balance. Of course, there are times, like anything, you're going to have to sacrifice. And I have always put my education primary. However, of course, like I said, PhD and learning has affected relations and that type of stuff just because you are kind of locked in.
Yeah.
That's something that I struggled a lot with. it's just like it does shackle you for like, it's like you sign a contract for another 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Of course you can quit anytime, but I'm not the type of person that would want to quit.
Want to quit.
And I know people that have kind of, realized it's not for them and did quit. And I'm very happy for those people. I just couldn't do it to myself, at least for me. So no, it's definitely manageable, a work-life balance. It's just a matter of prioritizing and finding that footing does take time.
Yeah.
So when I started, I could not manage. I was extremely overwhelmed. Kind of like took all the work with me and always thinking about it, nightmares, and honestly, just like that. But in the past year and a half or so, the second half of my PhD, you get into a rhythm of it. And the failures don't hit you as hard.
Yeah.
So it doesn't weigh on you as heavily because you get into the routine of just got to keep going. It's a chip away mentality. Like every day, you're not going to you're not going to finish your PhD, but at least you're chipping away at it. Yeah.
It's kind of like pushing that rock up the mountain sort of slowly.
It's a large mountain.
Yeah.
But there is a top of the mountain eventually.
You're going to get
And you will get there. You just got to stop thinking about the final point and just kind of focus on the current, like every day by day. You honestly, like you just have to take it day by day because it does become overwhelming.
And that's halfway through the episode. Time flies when you're having fun. Am I right? As a side note, grab some water. Remember to stay hydrated. Now back to the episode.
And would you say there are any things that have changed about you as a person over the course of your PhD? Like you're about to finish next month pretty much. Like do you think you become a different person?
Yeah.
Like
very much so.
Not just in your professional life, but also personal.
I think I was actually thinking about it yesterday, self-reflecting, because I tend to do that quite a bit. I don't even recognize myself when I started. I mean, on different levels. It's not. I'm not saying the person I was like a bad person, not at all. But I've just matured in every aspect of my life. Like a PhD, yes, it's academic and et cetera, but it like the constant fail, like the life lessons it teaches you, really does transcend the corners of the lab. Also, as I mentioned, you sacrifice a lot on your journey to. I wouldn't even say success because that depends how you define success, but on the journey to becoming a better you. So that entail teaches you.
Yes.
But also a PhD has allowed me to travel a lot in the past, at least in the past year. And in just this year, I've become a much more mature version of myself just because I've experienced more. Yeah, and that's a good thing about a PhD.
And do you have any other tips or advice for getting through postgrad study? So you obviously mentioned like that feeling of being overwhelmed. What tips would you give people on managing like stress? And obviously when you're doing experiments, things go wrong and that would depend on what type of PhD a person is doing, but there's going to be hurdles and obstacles. How would you manage that?
I mean, I'll give you, like you asked, my tips, but of course, if you ask every PhD student, they will have different tips. For me, I think maintaining, like having friends that are PhD students is a lifesaver. Just because you might have, like I have a best friend, I have really, really close friends, I mean, even family outside of my PhD, but they never understand the stresses that I go through. And I've been met a lot with like answers like, well, why do you work that hard? You don't need to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like the X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But I got in a rhythm of like just catching up with my PhD friends. Well, they're my friends, but they also do their PhDs. Just catching up for a regular coffee. Literally, that half an hour in the morning really helps me kind of feel okay. Because the worst thing you can do is do anything and feel like you're alone in the misery. And I emphasize misery because it does feel miserable sometimes. It's not and I'm not trying to like put anyone off a PhD, but it's like if you can't, there is not a single PhD you talk to would say it's the same journey, but also would tell you that it's all highs. There's no such thing as a high. Like everything's a positive. Other things I've adopted, keeping myself, like I want to keep healthy, so I just go to the gym, which is I started a year and a half ago, but that's really helped with like stress. I mean, not to bring science into it, but if you do like exercise in the morning, then it kind of really helps with,
It does.
with your cognitive ability
Yeah.
throughout the day. And I actually have noticed that. But it also kind of calms my body, at least in my mind. Other things is like it's essential, crucial to keep, do the hobbies that you were interested in before. You have to have a life outside of a PhD.
Yeah.
And I see so many that the PhD is their life. And I understand why, but then it actually has a negative effect on your PhD because you really do need to detach at least for a couple hours a day. Something that I adopted, which is a luxury that I was fortunate with, is I started my days earlier, so I finished earlier.
Yeah.
The good thing about a PhD is autonomous. So like, of course, given if your supervisors are not too micromanaging, which I hope they're not, in our case, no. They let you work at your own time.
Yeah.
So that's something that's very important to me. I can't be micromanaged.
No.
So I had the flexibility to work my own schedule. So I would always be the first in, but I'd be the first out. And then I would leave around at 2 p.m. some days.
Yeah.
A lot of the days, actually. If not earlier sometimes. Depends on the workload. And then I had the rest of the day to do what I wanted to do. The hobbies, etc. But yeah, that's some advice. Also, like I mentioned, the chip away mentality. And also understand that nothing is never going to be perfect, the work that you do. And there's always going to be more to do.
Yeah.
So when you really understand that wholeheartedly, you realize that it's okay for things not to work out. And as long as you just kind of keep going, then you'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
And the thesis is never perfect, as I am very much aware of.
No, I'm sure it'll be great.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Hey, you're listening to the Whelmed podcast. Stay whelmed.
One final question. You've been teaching as part of your PhD, or teaching undergrad students and everything. Obviously, like you were mentioning the other day, like there are some like cohorts that are great and some cohorts that are not so great.
Yes.
So if anyone is listening who is a current undergrad student, like not just in health and med, but any other degree, would you have any tips for them for like just in terms of like class behavior?
Tips for them on class manners? No, they're actually very well behaved. I actually rarely had issues with like students in class. I think it's just more of and you'll notice this actually. The more I've traveled, the more I realize that the Western society, because we're so privileged, and we're in a very privileged country, and because education is free, you have a large influx of students at university that are at university for the sake of being at university. And that's because education is free. So is that usually, I mean, I'm not trying to bring money into it, but when you're paying outright for education, you tend to care more about it because there's a financial element to it. When you're not seeing the financial elements, they're still paying it, but it's a HECS debt.
Yeah.
But because they're not seeing it, it becomes more of for a lot of first years at least. It kind of, they kind of weed themselves out and realize that this is not for me. But a lot of first years it's social, and they are just, recently turned adults. I don't blame. I'm not telling them to act like 25 or 30-year-olds, but I think it's important to understand, and I went through this too. It's such a pivotal time where a lot of people also have like family and kind of cultural pressure to go to university, even though they don't want to. So I'm always understanding of that. But I think the biggest tip is to really. It's always hard, and I know this because I do come from a ethnic background, so I think I have some say in this.
Okay.
Because I have experienced it. I'm the only one from my siblings that has gone to uni and like continued with uni or hasn't, kind of dropped out. I'm not saying my siblings haven't done well, but they've realized that it wasn't for them, and that was frowned upon initially.
Yeah.
Luckily, my mom is like not too strict in that sense, but like a typical Arab mom really wants you to get a great education, doctor, that type of stuff. So there is an inherent stress that comes with expectations.
Yeah.
And the thing is, though, it's very hard, extremely hard for an individual that's grown up in that culture, in that environment all their life, to go against the grain and say, no, I don't want to do a PhD. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, or not a PhD, but undergrad. No, I
Yeah.
don't. Because, I mean, of course, you should understand from the parents' perspective, like usually if they're migrants, they never really sacrifice everything for this type of life.
Yeah.
But then it also really comes down to the individual in which it is their life. I'm not saying don't do anything productive. I really hope that you do productive things, and but not just like be a bum. But I'm saying that it's not for everyone. And I actually have seen a lot of people that have graduated with me undergrad and just ended up working in retail.
Yeah.
And those people, I always wonder, I'm like, I would never say education's a waste, but it was definitely taxing on them long run.
Yeah.
Because they could have done something else that they were passionate about. Sometimes it's hard to do something you're passionate about because it goes against a lot of things.
Yeah.
And it's particularly hard when you come from cultural backgrounds that it's kind of like an expectation. And there's something that I did learn in my PhD, there's an extreme amount of guilt that accompanies doing something different than what is culturally the norm. But there is such a great reward personally in doing what really you should be doing. And eventually your family, hope they're loving, they'll come around because when you are, and you will be, manifested, when you are successful in whatever you choose to do, because usually if you're passionate about something, you're going to put a lot of effort into it. Then they'll come around to it. But that it's a very tough period in which you go against the grain and show results to kind of back up what you really want to do.
Yeah.
But then again, some people take, forever to find out what they really want to do.
That's
I
true.
wouldn't even say I have found out exactly what I want to do. But I know that's something I like doing is teaching. So I'm just going to go with it for now.
Yeah.
Whether that changes, very possible.
Because life changes and different things happen.
They do.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming in today, Zein.
for having me.
It was a great pleasure to talk with you.
So nice to talk to you.
And I feel like you just gave me a whole lot of advice about like future
gotta-
study.
You just got to kind of sit with it for a bit.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
I hope it was useful.
Yeah.
Not just to you, but I'll see you tomorrow probably.
Yeah.
But, to anyone that's listening,
Yeah.
just sharing my 2 cents.
Thank you as always for tuning in and sticking around to the end. We appreciate you guys so much. And a big, massive special shout out to Zein for chatting with us on this episode. He's an absolute all-round amazing human being and also a minor internet celebrity. Since you've stuck around for this long, I'll drop his socials here. He is at Zein Amro on Instagram and TikTok, and you can check out his poetry there as well. That's all we've got for today, but stay whelmed and we will catch you guys next time. Bye!